The courtroom was tense as the judge eyed the young teen standing before the bench. The atmosphere was heavy with expectation, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting to see what would unfold. The boy, no older than 16, stood with his head slightly bowed, his hands clutching the edges of his worn jacket. His nervous energy was palpable, and yet there was a quiet resolve in his demeanor that hinted at something deeper, something unspoken. The judge, a stern man with years of experience etched into the lines of his face, leaned forward, his gaze sharp and unyielding. He spoke with authority, his voice cutting through the murmurs that filled the courtroom. "You stand here, accused of theft, a crime that is neither petty nor excusable. Do you understand the gravity of your actions?" The boy lifted his head, meeting the judge's eyes for the first time. His gaze was steady, though his voice quivered when he began to speak. "I do, Your Honor, but I need you to hear my story before you pass judgment." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "This is not a platform for excuses, young man. If you have something to say, you had better make it worthwhile." Taking a deep breath, the boy began to recount his tale. He spoke of his mother, bedridden and frail, of his younger siblings, who looked to him for guidance and care. He described the cold nights when their small apartment lacked heat, the empty cupboards that mocked his efforts to provide for his family. He explained how desperation had led him to steal a loaf of bread from a nearby store, a choice he did not take lightly, but felt was his only option. As the boy spoke, the courtroom grew silent. His words painted a vivid picture of struggle and sacrifice, a reality far removed from the comfort and privilege of many in the room. The judge listened, his expression unreadable, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something human, something empathetic. When the boy finished speaking, he stood quietly awaiting the judge's response. The silence stretched on, each passing second feeling like an eternity. Finally, the judge leaned back in his chair, his stern demeanor giving way to something softer. "You have presented a compelling case, young man, but the law is the law. And yet, justice is not merely about punishment. It is about understanding the circumstances that lead to crime. Your actions were wrong, but your intent was not malicious." The boy nodded his head low, but there was a spark of hope in his eyes. The judge continued, speaking directly to the boy, but addressing the room at large. "We must consider not only the act, but the reasons behind it. This young man acted out of desperation to care for his family, a situation that speaks to the failures of our society as much as his own choices." The room murmured with approval as the judge turned to the prosecutor and defense attorney. "I propose a sentence that allows this young man to repay his debt to society without further jeopardizing his family. He will perform community service at a food bank, and in return, we will provide resources to ensure his family does not suffer further deprivation." The boy's eyes widened in surprise and gratitude. He spoke again, his voice steady this time. "Thank you, Your Honor. I will not waste this chance." As the courtroom adjourned, the judge watched the boy leave, his steps lighter than when he had entered. The judge leaned back in his chair, reflecting on the events of the day. He had challenged the boy, expecting a timid or rehearsed response. Instead, he had been met with honesty and courage, a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Months later, the judge received a letter from the boy. It was a simple note, but its words carried profound meaning. The boy wrote of his time at the food bank, of the people he had met and the lessons he had learned. He spoke of his family now supported by local organizations, and of his renewed hope for the future. He ended the letter with the promise to pay forward the kindness he had been shown. The judge folded the letter, placing it in his desk drawer, where it joined a small collection of similar notes. These reminders of humanity and redemption were his anchor in a career often marred by darkness. He smiled faintly, knowing that justice had not only been served, but had also sown the seeds of a brighter tomorrow.